Big Tin Can is the world's leading sales learning and enablement platform that delivers the onboarding and training, preparation, coaching, customer engagement, and follow-up and insights that modern businesses need to win.
Welcome to the Sales Influence Podcast, where we talk about finding the why in how people buy. I'm your host, Victor Antonio. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for lending me those ears. And if you're watching this on video, which I hope you are also, thank you for those eyeballs. Today, I have Mr. Sales Mastery himself, Jim Dickie. What's happening, Jim?
We're having a great day out here, just getting ready for the holidays.
Oh, man, I hear you. Jim, let these folks know a little on the Sales Influence Podcast, a little bit about yourself, a little background, and then before we jump into today's topic.
Well, it's interesting. We're talking about sales influence. My whole career has been sales. When I got out of grad school, my undergrad and graduate degrees were actually in counseling. And I was kind of going to pursue that direction. Both my sisters got their doctorates, but I got a call and IBM said, "We want to talk to you." And I said, "About what?" And he said, "A job." And I'm thinking like, "You what, working in HR?" And they said, No, you're not qualified." And I said, What are you thinking of? And they said, "Sales." And I go, "Sales?" Go, "What's sales?" And they said, "What's counseling?" And I said, "Well, I ask a lot of questions." And they said, "Like what?" And they said, "Well, how long has it been like this? And what would better look like? And if you didn't do that, what else would you do when standing in the way of progress?" They said, "Give it a shot. See how that goes for you." So I found into sales. I loved it. I ended up going into the software industry from IBM, co-founded 3 software companies. We sold each one of those. And then when we sold the last one to HP, I decided there's nobody doing primary research on sales. So we started a company, Sales Insights, to go in and start collecting metrics on what's going on with the sales force. What's the ramp up time for new sales reps? What's the outcome of forecast deals? What's the customer churn rate? And we started gathering data, and we thought we might do that for a couple of years. But 2 decades later, we were still running the same studies, gathering longitudinal data on how the profession of sales has been evolving. And so we were acquired by Miller Heiman in 2015, stuck around there for a couple of years, but then said, if Miller Heiman is going to continue the old studies on how sales has been evolving over time, we wanted to take a look at the future of sales. So that's been really my partner, Barry Traylor's, my focus the last couple of years is where are we going, especially now that AI is coming to the forefront in sales. And how is that going to change the sales profession, but also how is it going to change who is successful selling so that companies can decide how to leverage that and maximize, achieving gain or removing pain going forward, but also change the whole buyer-seller dynamic.
I love it. That was a great intro. You made me laugh on the counselor piece. That's really funny. I mean, if you think about it, right? For some reason, when you were saying that, Jim, I had this visual of you laying the customer down on the psychological couch there, psychiatrist couch, and just say, "Tell me what's your problem, what's hurting, what's working, what's not working." Does that make sense? You mentioned AI, and we'll get into the future of selling. But I was talking to Dr. I forgot his first name, but Mr. Hover wrote the Sales Innovation Paradox. And it was interesting. He's a professor over at University of Texas, I believe. And he said something interesting. I want to get your take. I said, "Where is AI today?" And he said, "Victor, we're in the trough of disillusionment." In other words, it was hyped up so great, the Gartner hype cycle. We're in that trough where, expectations have fallen very short and people are recalibrating how to use AI as part of their sales, business. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because, as I mentioned, I went into the software industry and I actually did my first AI projects back in 83 and 88.
Wow.
And by the way, we were using algorithms developed in the 50s. So I've been through AI winters before where, oh, it's here. Oh, it's not. Oh, it's here. Oh, it's not. Oh, it's here. Oh, it's not. And the key thing was, when we took a look back at those times, the hardware wasn't there, the software wasn't there, the data wasn't there, the expertise in data science wasn't there. But things are emerging now today. And it's interesting that I also follow a gentleman named William Gibson. He's a futurist. And one of his quotes I always loved is, "The future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed." And I think that's where we're at with AI today. Barry and I just published an article in the November-December issue of Harvard Business Review. By the way, you get 3 free articles a month if you're out there, so you can go online and download it. But we did it with Ben Shapiro and Boris Freuberg at Harvard. Ben is the icon, head of marketing at Harvard Business School for years. Boris runs the executive education program. And specifically, what we looked to do on that, Victor, was to go out and not only take a look at the AI landscape, but also look at case studies where people
Hmm.
are actually utilizing AI to do fundamentally different things, not the simple things like record a conversation and tell you how many times you said, oh, as you were talking to a customer, but really get
Right.
down and fundamentally change the kind of conversations that buyers and sellers could have. And we think it's at the beginning of the uptick where people are now realizing what they can do with it. But it's also going to be a game changer. I was at a Dreamforce talking to David Schmeier, who's the chief product officer for Salesforce. And he made the comment that Uber is coming to every industry. And I said, what do you mean? He says, somebody's going to come in with disruptive technology, utilizing data and AI, and they're going to totally disrupt every single industry, manufacturing, distribution, finance, pharma, whatever it is. And I really believe he's correct. And I think that there's a first mover advantage on doing things today that a lot of people don't understand. The classic first mover advantage is if I had two companies, neither of them had a structured sales process, and one of them implements Picket, Challenger. So they
Right.
implement Challenger. I can show you statistically that they should outperform the other company that stays with an ad hoc process. And they will have that advantage in terms of percentage reps making quota, win rate of forecast deals, et cetera, until the other company does the same thing. And then the other company can catch up. With AI, there's a concept called breakaway speed that says, once I get started, I just keep getting better. And so the question is, how far behind is everybody else? I think that's a thing that people need to start taking a look at, is to not wait for AI to come out of the trough, as the professor down at UT was talking about, but to sit there and say, can I really afford not to be on the forefront of this?
That's great insight. I mean, okay, there's so many things. Let me unpack that one, man. You just said that was a great riff, by the way. Excellent riff. So the breakaway speed is very interesting, right? Because when you look at a company like Amazon, for example, that's pure breakaway speed. That's like, you've gone to another stratosphere. Is that a good analogy? Here's a company that's collecting data. The massive amount of data they're collecting on a daily basis is really putting far ahead of anybody else. Is that, I want people to understand what you mean by breakaway speed and why
Well,
it happens.
let me give you a specific sales example. So we did a study, a case study at US Bank. And so US Bank, what they did was they said, what we want to do is to use AI to analyze not prospect records, but customer records. So they took 4.2 million customer records. They wrote some AI algorithms. They said, go and take a look and tell us which one of our customers are likely to be interested in another product or service from us and why.
Mhm.
Did the analysis, 4.2 million records in a couple of hours, gave them a score from 1 to 100, explained why, and they told the financial officers, go call in people that have a score of 81 and above. And within a couple of months, they had a 234% increase in conversion rates of existing customers to additional opportunities. So that was pretty impressive right off the bat. But a year later, I remember calling their SVP of strategy, and I said, Kai, I'm interested in using your example at a conference I'm speaking at. I've got my notes, they're written in a notebook, and I can't read my handwriting anymore. And so I said, just want to make sure. It was 234% increase in conversion rates, right? He says, well, that's the old number. I go, oh, interesting. What's the new number? And he says 386%.
Wow.
I said, really? I said, what did you do differently? And he said, nothing. I said, what do you mean nothing? He said, we didn't do anything. The algorithms got smarter. They started analyzing the results that people had in terms of the success rates and all those things. They fine-tuned themselves. I remember sharing that information with another bank, and they were going, do you really think we can get a 234% increase? And I said, well, that's half the question you should be asking, because your competitor's not at 2.34x increase. They're at 3.868 increase. So how far behind them do you want to be? And I think that's the thing that people need to really understand, is that AI helps get better. It just doesn't stop. It's not like we get to a plateau and we're done. There's a ton of things that AI can do to help you get better longer term. And the question is, will I ever catch up? If I'm just looking at going down the Autobahn and I see my competitor's lights, taillights disappearing over the horizon, I'm in trouble.
Right. Now, you mentioned two things. So let's tie this all together, because, by the way, it's a great example. I love tangible examples like that. You also talked about, in a sense, the Uberification, right, of the infrastructure
Yep.
of companies, to achieve that breakaway speed. So I wanted to ask you a question because you jokingly said something. It's not about recording phone calls and how many times you said, when was a competitor mentioned? Because that's really narrow AI.
Yes.
Right. And I think you're talking about broader AI. So having said that, using the bank as an example that you just mentioned, what does that mean for a corporate structure? Because in order to make that happen, it's got to be a change or a shift in culture, right? And give me two parts here on an answer. What is the cultural change that has to happen? And then what is the actual organization infrastructure or the structure itself that has to change to align itself to be able to implement an AI solution?
Well, I'll give you the broader example. GE years ago came out with the concept of the brilliant factory. And so it's a concept of utilizing AI to tie together the work of multiple people and multiple functional areas within the company. And so the basic premise was that you would start off with, so GE makes jet engines for aircraft. And so in the jet engines themselves, there are 32 sensors, and they send back, I believe, about a terabyte of data per flight based on what's happening on those things. So you're getting real-time data coming back to GE. GE sells the engines to Boeing. Boeing puts them in a plane. They sell it to Delta Airlines, United Airlines, somebody. Here's the key thing on it. If you think about it, at the very beginning of the process, I've got CAD/CAM engineers at GE who are utilizing tools to design the next engine. As they're doing so, AI is analyzing what they're doing individually and saying, hey, Jim's doing something going to help Barb, but Bob is doing something that could hinder Beth. And so it corrects those things right away. I get done with the prototype. I send it over to engineering. Engineering starts going through and AI is analyzing things. It says, well, you've got this thing spec'd right now that the mean time to failure needs to be 99.9%. But if it could be 99.5%, we could go and bid this to 3 suppliers versus just 1. So it's coming back to the CAD/CAM guys. Could we make this change? It then goes into production. They actually produce the engine. Well, then they send the engine over to Boeing. Well, Boeing's got CAD/CAM designers. They've got the engineering guys building the prototypes. They've got the production guys. And AI is taking a look at all of those things. And it's feeding information not just inside of Boeing, but back and forth to GE and Boeing. So now there's a collaboration. There's a co-creation that's happening at a different level than anything ever before. Well, there's a concept called a digital twin. So actually, when I'm building a 787, I can build a digital twin of that plane and analyze what happens after it's going out and it's being flown for the next 3 or 4 years. And from that, I can create the 797 that doesn't exist. Now, think about it. I've got this huge relationship already with tons of data going back and forth between GE and Boeing. We're also working on what the 797 is going to look like. When it comes time to build the 797, how is somebody going to usurp GE as the jet engine manufacturer? They've got all the data. They've been co-developing and co-creating for the last several years. So it's really going to change the whole dynamics of, these things of not, vendor and customer, but partners. And I think it's going to change everything within the culture of the company. That's not just sales utilizing this. It's going to be manufacturing, customer support, finance, pick it. And I think that's really the long-term goal that people need to be aware of is there's a huge impact that's just going to disrupt business in general.
And that's a great example. But I wanted to zoom back. Let me just push you a little harder on what I'm trying to get to, because I'm trying to understand it. So I'm hoping you'll give me the insight, because I don't have the answer here. I'm a medium-sized company, an enterprise company, and AI is like somewhere in the distance. You know what I mean? I see it. I know I need to be doing it, but it's not, I can't get my company to start thinking about it. I guess that's the real question I'm asking. When you look at the G example, they're pretty much adopted the technology already. It's how do we, I'll say distribute it, throughout the company so we can utilize or take advantage or leverage every aspect of the AI. But what if I'm just a company that's got, I'm a sizable company, I'm $100 million. I've been doing it the old fashioned way. How do you begin to change that? And what does a structure look like? The culture's got to be there, but what does an organizational structure look like to support it, to make sure it doesn't fail?
I think the major thing that we've been talking to people about is to go out, Victor, and have internally the discussion. If only we could do X, our business would be better. And say, well, what does that mean? So I'm living here, outside of Boulder. We had the Marshall Fire last year on December 30th. 1,100 homes got burned down. And about 2 or 3% now, 11 months later, have solved their claim with their insurance provider.
Hmm.
So, now they say, well, yeah, and by the way, everyone who hasn't settled is pissed. So
Right.
they're going, I can't start building. I'm still making mortgage payments on a home that I burned down 11 months ago, and I still don't have a check from my insurance company. I
Wow.
can't get started on anything. So, that's the thing of sitting down and saying, well, why does it take 11 months to process a claim on the house? Well, I got to take a look at all the blueprints for the old house and how could we build that today? Where would the lumber come from? And what about the changes in building protocols and regulations and all this other stuff? Well, those are problems AI can solve. And by the way, I don't have to solve those. You're talking about $100 million company.
Mm.
There are companies out there that are going to build solutions that will get the answers and sell them to companies like that. They don't have to create the AI infrastructure themselves. But why couldn't you get the claims process down to 11 weeks? Why couldn't you get down to 11 days?
Right.
Because I think that's the major thing. So I think it's having these discussions inside. What are problems we're solving? And then is somebody else solving those? And it may be that, if you're in Amazon, you've got a zillion data scientists, go try to solve it yourself. But I'll give you another small example. One of our clients is in the agricultural lending business. So not a huge bank at all by any means. It's not anywhere near a Chase or a Wells Fargo or whatever, but they're a niche. And what they do is they focus on farmers who have farms or, corporations who run multiple farms. Their process in the past was a lot of relationship building. So I call up the farmer and I'd say, hey, Victor, I got some tickets to the University of Nebraska football game. Why don't we go to the game and we'll talk about your farm? There's a company out of LA that's aggregating agricultural data. So there are satellites that fly over fields all the time, and it will tell you what the temperature is of each one of the farms that it's surveying. There are also sensors on drones that the Department of Agriculture regularly flies over fields that will tell you what the moisture content is and pest infestation. There are sensors on John Deere tractors that as they go up and down the aisle, they're going to tell you, information they're seeing on what the potential harvest looks like. Right. So they're aggregating all this data already, and they're then going back and selling it to the financial officers. So I don't say, Victor, let's go talk about your farm. I said, Victor, let me tell you about your farm. The data I got says that you were switching from corn to soybeans. You wanted a line of credit that would extend through the end of September. You were going to pay us back in October, and you're expecting the 97% yield of what you had last year. But it was a wet spring. You planted late. You're going to be harvesting late. We're seeing the numbers come in that says the harvest is probably going to be end of October. And so you probably can't pay us back until the middle of November, depending if you want to get the best prices. So why don't we extend your line of credit and all at once an extra 1/16 of a point? So the bank does not need to be experts. They just need to go out and say, is somebody collecting this data? Is somebody analyzing? And can we subscribe to it? And I think that's the thing that people need to do is start saying, I need the IT guys to go out and find what's available or what's coming down the road that we could use within our organization, whatever it is, to change how the game is played.
That's an interesting, you just shifted my perspective a little bit. Thank you for that. Because you're right. You could acquire the data, and maybe that's the requirement. You're not looking to use the data or build an infrastructure on AI, but utilize what's already available based on what companies are doing out there to predict the future. And speaking of prediction of future, this is my way of trying to segue into the, as we're moving into the new year, the talks of recession, right? That's the big conversation. And I want to get your perspective, and I was hoping you can tie it to either, retention or even onboarding new salespeople. Take your piston shot at which one you want to talk about, whether it's retention or onboarding new people, or maybe even both, given the fact we're headed into some serious headwind coming our way.
Well, it's interesting you ask, Victor, because we took a look again. We've been doing these longitudinal studies on what's happening in world sales.
Jim, you're just a nerd. Let's just call it what it is.
Yes, I am. But we went back and took a look at the data from 2008 to 2010. So the last, black swan event, the meltdown of the economy at the end of 2008, the struggles in 2009, the recovery in 2010. And we said, what did we learn? And so specifically to your question, based on looking at that data, I'd focus on retention, but I'd focus on two types of retention of my existing customers and retention of my existing sales professionals. And here's why. When we went into the 2008 recession, what we saw was a spike in involuntary turnover because we let people go that weren't performing well. And so, we sat there and said, we're going to get rid of deadwood on this thing. And so we had a spike on that. In 2009, what we saw was very, very little turnover, mainly because nobody was hiring. And so therefore there was no place to go. So I'd already gotten rid of the non-performers in 2008, no places for the new guys to go to. But in 2010, voluntary turnover, a performing rep leaves your company, doubled from the 2008 level. And the reason was during that whole period of time, people were staying in place and nobody was asking the question, are the people that are here today here because of what we're doing for them in a rough time or in spite of what we're doing to them? And a lot of companies found out in 2010 that it was the first. They were there in spite of what they were doing to them. And so, all of a sudden, 2010, everybody starts hiring again. What's the hiring profile? Experienced reps. So you go out and you call up the reps and the guy goes, thank God you called. When you get a call from your director, get me out of here. And so I think that's an issue that people will need to watch on. The second was the companies that did best during the recession in 2009 did not focus on new accounts. They focused on how to expand existing accounts. How do we go in there and work with them and do extra value add types of services? So one of the things was Cisco. They're a company that produces food. This is Cisco with an S, the food company, not Cisco with a C. But they were actually running, conferences and workshops in their food centers for restaurants saying, here's how to do a cost-effective happy hour. So you can get people come in. Maybe they don't come in for the big banquet dinner, but can we have a happy hour business that helps you weather the tough times? So they were really partnering up and bringing other areas of expertise in. And I think those are the companies that did a lot better. And I think so. I think focusing on those too. The other part is too, if I'm trying to go and increase sales in 2023, well, the ramp up time for a new salesperson in technology is 10 to 12 months. So if I'm going to look for them to contribute revenue, I better have hired them last February because otherwise they're not going to be productive.
Right. That's, dang it, Jay, I like talking to you. The upselling piece is interesting, right? 'Cause I wrote a book on upselling, but I think what you're putting a nice little twist on it, right? Because I said, if you focus on your existing customer base, you can increase your revenues by 30% based on different studies, right? But you're saying something different than just going back to sell them something. You're talking about when you say partnering with them, the example you used for the restaurant business, you're saying, how can I add value to you? I might not be getting any revenue from you, but at least I add value that you'll want to stay with me. Do you have any other examples of that?
Yeah, I'll give it two. One is we did a joint analysis with Korn Ferry, taking a look at B2B buyers. And this was a study that was done in 2018 that we replicated last year. So we've got not only, a couple, 3 years in between, but we've got pre-COVID and post-COVID data. So these are buyers. These are not people in purchasing or procurement. These are end user executives, maybe making 5, 6, 7-figure decisions. And you've heard a lot of people like Challenger saying, well, tons of the buying is happening and it's not involving the sales rep. We go, great, where's your data? Well, it's just intuitive, and I'm a Deming's fan. Deming always said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Right. So in 2018, we got data. And so we said, when are you involving salespeople in your buying process? And back then, 56% of the companies came back and said, we're involving them early. Half of them said we're involving them when we're first starting to imagine what our problem is. The others said, no, we're doing our own needs analysis. But when we start to think about what the solution is, that's when we bring in the salespeople. Right. 56% in 2018. Last year went down to 43%. Okay. So that's heading in the wrong direction. We asked the following question, is there anything that would make you involve a salesperson earlier in the process? And in 2018, 9% of the people said nothing, which meant 91% of the people said there is something. This year, 25% of the people said there's nothing. So headed in the wrong direction. But again, for the 75% who said there is something, we said, what is it? What would make you do that? And it fell into 3 buckets. The first one was, if this is new to me and I perceive that you could help educate me and help me navigate and take advantage of certain opportunities and avoid the landmines and potholes along the way, I'll bring you in as an educational resource. The second thing is if this is risky, and risk came in two flavors. If this is risky to me personally, like if this project doesn't work, I'm fired. Or if this is risky to the organization, I will bring you in if I think that you can help me mitigate or eliminate risk. And the third is if this is complex. If I need to go out and involve other people, other functional areas inside my company or outside to make this thing happen, and I perceive that you could help build consensus and build a part of willingness on these other parties to be part of this successful project, I will bring you in. Those have nothing to do with the product.
Right.
They're all about value-add services. They're all about you being a subject matter expert resource to them. And I think that's the thing. Buyers are telling you, if all you're doing is, all your salespeople do is regurgitate what's on your website about your product, I don't need to talk to them. So how are you going to change the conversational dynamics?
I like that. New, risky, or complex. I was talking to Brent Adamson, used to be with Gartner, wrote the Challenger Sale, is now with Ecosystem, right?
Yep.
And he said something interesting. He said that today's customers, and this really ties into what you're saying, I just want to get your twist on it. He says, it's not so much that they don't want salespeople. What they're really looking for is for them to have the confidence that they're making the right buying decision. In other words, the job of the salesperson is to imbue them with the confidence to go ahead and make a buying decision so the deal doesn't get stuck. Your thoughts on that? I mean, they pretty much line up with what you're saying. Am I correct?
Yeah. And I think, again, going back to the study we did, one of the questions we asked is, where do you go to get information about solving business problems? And the number one thing on the list is, I go to myself. If I've done this before and it worked, I'll just repeat what I did last time with the people I did it with last time.
Right,
Number
right.
two on the list was
That's obvious, right?
I go to a subject matter expert. Number three,
Yeah.
interesting enough, was I go to industry forums like LinkedIn, and I look for other people in my positions who have solved similar type of problems. Number 9 on the list is I talk to a salesperson. It was number 9 in 2018, number 9 the last survey as well. So I think it goes right to your point on that, is that, what else are you bringing to the table on these things? And, you've got to have a different kind of conversation. And I think that's going to be a change where, when I joined IBM, persuasion was a huge skill that you were measured on and they expected you to have in order to be successful. Now, again, I think it's going back to these things like collaboration and co-creation. And is that going to change the profile of who is successful selling going forward?
You bring up a point also about, I keep hearing the word, salespeople should be more like brand ambassadors, right? Like, because you mentioned LinkedIn as far as getting information from, different sources. How do you see, or what have you seen in the role of, let's say, marketing? Because I think marketing today plays a more prominent role in the sales process, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong or I'm looking at this wrong. I used to think salespeople had the pole position in the sales process. And I understand that depends where they come in. But I see marketing now as, and I'll use somebody else's term, I think Tim Reister used to, buying preferences. When they go online, their preferences are forming as to what they want to see, what they think the requirements are going to be. What do you see marketing's role in the sales process today? And how do you see salespeople's marketing role?
I love Tim Roberge. He was one of the founders of HubSpot. I was one of the first people I heard use the term schmarketing.
Smart. Okay.
And he says, I want the lines between sales and marketing to be so blurred that you just can't tell the difference. And again, let me give you an old success story that shows what happens on that. So I go back to, one of the economic downturns, all of a sudden what you had is the automobile industry, trying to go in and say, oh, Jesus, what happens when we go into 2009 and, people are making car decisions? We need to come up with a message to the market that marketing can deliver on why I should buy GM over Ford, or Ford over Chrysler, or Chrysler over BMW. The guys at Hyundai, there was a VP of sales, VP of marketing. I remember Jeff Sikowski was the sales guy, and he went out and they sat down and they're having a beer and they said, is that really what we should be doing? Should we be going out with a message of why our car versus somebody else's car? And so they said, why don't we go ask the customer? So they brought together some customers for a focus group. I mean, this is really early on in the process. I mean, they did a focus group like a week later, and they said, what are you guys interested in? Do you want to know about why buy Hyundai versus somebody else? And they said, no. He said, what are you interested in? And I said, I want to know why to buy a car at all. He said,
Mhm.
What do you mean buy a car at all? All you're here because you said you needed a car. Yeah, I need it. But what happens if I lose my job? They said, tell me more. They said, well, I'm just worried about the economy. And if I lose my job, they're going to take the car back and it's going to be a hit to my credit and, all these things. But, I got to have it because I should have reliable transportation. So they went back and they came back with a Hyundai assurance model. And they rolled it out within 6 weeks. They were on ads for, like the playoffs in the football, in that NFL football season saying, here's the Hyundai assurance model. Buy a Hyundai today if you need a new car. And here's the deal. If you run into problems and you lose your job, we'll make the payments for you for 3 months. We will. And if after that time, you still can't make the payments, we'll take the car back, no hit to your credit record. In 2009, the American automobile industry declined by 25% in sales. Hyundai increased by 2%. Why? Because they went out and asked the customer, they put together the right marketing programs, supported it with the right sales programs in the dealerships to go out there and say, we're here with you. It's a rough time, but we're here to offer you what you need today.
Yep.
And I think those
By
are the
way,
types of things where you're exactly right. I think marketing's got to go out and say, what's the message we want them to hear? What's the message they want to hear? And how do we deliver on it?
Just drop the microphone right now, Jim. Just drop the mic. Just go like that. Just drop the mic, right? By the way, I actually use that example in my presentation because I think it was 37 days for marketing to roll that out or something like that. I didn't have the extra flavor. I didn't know about the we'll make your payments for 3 months. I didn't know about that. So that's really interesting insight.
Well, you want to know the kicker on this thing? A couple of years later, I was at a conference and I ended up talking to the guy who'd been the former chief sales officer. And I sat there and said, out of curiosity, how many cars did you take back? And he started laughing. He said, what? He's maybe a dozen.
Yeah.
So it didn't cost him anything, but it sure as hell resonated with the marketplace. And they would have done it, but they didn't have to.
But the point you make, which is a great point, big shout out to Mark Roberge, who wrote the sales acceleration formula, I believe, right?
Yep.
The whole marketing thing. What your point is, I just want to reemphasize is that it's not so much about how we sell; it's how people buy or why they buy, the reason they buy or don't want to buy. We can understand it from a marketing standpoint. It's much better. You also, I don't know, are you familiar with Bob? I think it's Moesta is the way you pronounce his last name. Bob Moesta wrote that he worked with, what's his name? Clayton Christensen, who did the Innovator's Dilemma or something.
Mm-hmm.
They talked about jobs to be done. And one of the things they looked at, everything you just said pretty much lines up with understanding the customer first, why they do what they do, why they buy, what reasons for not buy, and then figure out a way to market to them. And I'm wondering if companies are getting that. You know what I mean? Instead of trying to pump more money, you see the growth, and maybe we should kind of go off on this little angle. You see the growth in sales tech, right? Different technology stacks for different companies. They just keep adding more stacks. And I'm wondering, are we missing? Are we just keep adding more technology, keep spinning our wheels, but what we're missing is that messaging to the customer.
It makes me kind of laugh, Victor, because there was a lady named Jessica Key. She wrote a great book called Info Trends. The one quote from the book that just stuck in my mind was, she said, technology does not beget a competitive advantage any more than paint and canvas beget a Van Gogh.
Nicely done.
And so I look at all these things. I was having a discussion probably 6 months ago now with a company, and we're talking about their tech stack. And I said, how many sales enablement systems do you have? And he says, 18. 18? Wow. I said, are you buying anything else? He says, yeah, I'll buy one of anything that replaces 3 of what I already have. And so I think the major thing out there is going out and somebody's got to come up with a coherent strategy for, let's just not go out by the latest shiny technology object. Let's go find a problem with the sales force. Every problem's, putting together a proposal within, 3 days. It's now taken 3 weeks. Or we're having a problem going through and, our conversion rate of leads to first calls has decreased 50% over the last month. Why? And let's go find a problem first, and then let's go take a look and say, is there a solution to that? And is the solution people, process, technology, or knowledge? And if it's tech, let's go do something.
Well said, Matt. Well said. Dr. Dover, who I mentioned earlier in his book, Sales Innovation Paradox, kind of talks about that, the paradox, right? Salespeople come up with a strategy or technology, customers get used to it. So now they have to reinvent something else to try to get to the customer adapts. And this lunacy continues, and people keep adding, as you point, keep throwing technology at it, thinking it's going to solve the problem. As we close this out, Jim, what are some of your predictions? Let's go into prediction mode. What are your predictions for the coming year? Changes in sales, some of the things that maybe you're seeing on the horizon that maybe most of us are not.
Yeah, we've already talked about the AI things. We talked about, some of the sales things. I think one of the key things, Victor, that's really getting a lot of berries in my focus is what about sales management? What about the whole process that management uses on how to put together, quotas, for example? And the key thing on it is, we're coming up, at the towards the beginning of 2023, salespeople are going to get an email on January 2nd. And it's going to be, hi, here's your new number for the year. And by the way, it's higher. Good luck. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't it be great if they got a second, email that said, and by the way, here's all the things the company's going to do to help you achieve that number. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we do enough with sales management on how do we develop our talent? How do we help these people mature? Because your quota is just the company's best guess at what the potential is of a given territory. It has nothing to do with the potential of the salesperson. It's the potential of that territory. And so I really think going into 2023, companies ought to sit there and say, what are we doing about coaching? What are we doing about personal development? What are we doing about creating career paths for these people? Because if I'm more productive, I'm really getting support from my manager, if I'm getting support from training, if I'm getting support from the rest of the company where they view sales as an integral part of the business, and the guys at finance are coming in and saying, hey, what can we do to help you? Well, the terms and conditions, they're just too complex. I spent 3 days trying to explain to them how our warranty works. Well, why doesn't finance or manufacturing take items? Let's go fix it. Let's streamline. Let's make it an easier job for them to do. And I think that's really where management across the organization needs to come and look at, specifically sales managers, going back through and saying, my job is not to create more followers and do the job for them. You just get it this far along in the process and I'll come in and close it for you, sonny boy. Just sit there. No, I don't want to create more followers. I want to create more leaders. And so if that means we need to retrain sales managers, if that means we need to train, evaluate the profile of what a good sales manager is, we ought to be able to take a look at that, because I think that's the horizon where a lot of potential still exists for improvement.
I agree. That's, by the way, great point. That's a nice way to kind of close this one out. I wanted to ask you, Jim, tell the folks, not only on the Sales Influence podcast, where they can get a hold of you, but, who do you work with? Who's like the type of company or companies that you help that should be reaching out to you for some help?
Yeah. I mean, the key thing on it is you can go to salesmastery.com and take a look there. I would really encourage everybody, as I mentioned earlier, the HBR article just came out for the Harvard or November, December issue. Everybody can go and get 3 free articles a month. So go download the article, and I think you'll get a flavor for what we're doing. But really, our whole goal when I started the company was, I said, I want to be a research and advisory services things. We're not a consulting company. We're not a sales training company. We're not a system integrator. We're not a sales enablement software provider. And so what we're doing is we're just going through, we continue to do the analysis on what's the world of sales look like today. What are the challenges people are facing, but what do you do about it? So when we go in and talk to a company and say, based on comparing you to your peer group, because we can do that based on all the data we collect, you need to change your compensation plan, or you need to change the way that your sales process, or you need to do a better job of inside sales and field sales collaboration. We're not looking for the next gig. I'm not looking to come in and train your salespeople. I'm not looking to come in and install more technology. I'm giving you what the data tells you is the best course of action for you to take. Because in today's world, at the salesperson level, maybe my goal is to be 1% better at everything I do. But at the sales organization level, what I really want to do is pick 1 or 2 things to be an order of magnitude better at. And then another 1 or 2 things, and then another 1 or 2 things. So our goal purely, Victor, is go and work with companies, help them to see where they're at, help them see what other companies are doing to solve the problems they have, and make some progress and then do something else. But do it by giving them unbiased advice that just says, this is data driven. This is not us trying to sell a new product or service through.
I love that focus, Jim. I love that focus. Thank you very much for that. Anyway, that's it for the Sales Influence podcast. Leave me some feedback on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, wherever you find this podcast. I'll put a link to Jim's article so you can read that. Check out salesmastery.com. Look Jim up. Follow him on LinkedIn. Based on this podcast, do I need to convince you why you should follow him? Just follow the man if you want some real information. After that, check out the Sales Velocity Academy. We put some new courses on there. On that note, this is Victor Antonio, always reminding you that selling ain't hard when you know how. Take care.
Big Tin Can is the world's leading sales learning and enablement platform that delivers the onboarding and training, preparation, coaching, customer engagement, and follow-up and insights that modern businesses need to win.